Boa tarde, pessoal. Nós estamos aqui mais um episódio do Cast for Closers. Hoje a gente tem um convidado especial, o Mark Roberge. Ele é CRO do HubSpot e eu vou apresentá-lo também em inglês para que ele consiga acompanhar a nossa conversa. E a partir de agora a gente muda o idioma oficial do podcast para inglês para os próximos 30 minutos, ok? Vamos lá então. So we have a very special guest here with us. He is Mark Roberge. Mark is Chief Revenue Officer at HubSpot Sales Products. Before that, he led HubSpot sales teams to 450 employees. That's quite a team. And led the company to a 100 million revenue. He's also author of the Sales Acceleration Formula, one of the best sellers books from sales guys, and he shares his learnings there on how he took HubSpot from 0 to $100 million on revenue. Hi Mark, it's a pleasure to have you here with us with Cast for Closers audience.
Hi Diego, thank you for being here.
Yeah,
we're not going to do this in Portuguese, huh?
Yeah, so if you prefer in Portuguese, we can change.
I'm only kidding. I wish I could.
Yeah, but our audience can catch up on English, so I think this won't be a problem, okay?
All right.
So Mark, as I was saying to you before, we have an audience full of VP of sales and entrepreneurs, so the questions we wrote are especially for them, right?
Great.
So, following on, early on, we have this very special moment, Mark, when the CEO stops selling and passes the baton to a first sales rep, right? Who would then carry on a first sales team. There are a lot of things to be worried about at this phase, okay? So what would be kind of your thoughts on how to master this first hiring?
Yeah, you're right, Diego. It's such an important stage for a startup.
Yeah.
And it's an area that unfortunately, even smart people that I watch get completely wrong. And let me elaborate on some of the challenges there and the bad decisions, and then maybe talk about what would be a good decision.
Cool.
So there's usually two bad decisions that are very common. The most common is they go out and find a sales leader that they're not ready for. And unfortunately, yes, a lot of times the investors push the founders and entrepreneurs to do this. They go out and try to get this really big name from a much larger company, someone with decades of sales experience, someone who's used to building a big team. And sure, the company's just not ready for that at that stage. Those people are just, the first thing they're going to do when they come to your company is ask where their assistant is. They just haven't worked in that sort of scrappy environment. Lots of times they haven't even sold in over a decade, haven't carried an individual quota. So really beware about trying to find that big name and lots of sales experience and lots of leadership experience too early. You'll be ready for that later, but at this stage it's not the case. The other mistake they'll make is they'll go find one of the top salespeople from their big competitor. Yeah, and the problem there, it sounds pretty good, but what happened is those people, they're doing great, but they do great in a very structured environment. When they join the company that they're working for, oftentimes they went through a month or two of very structured training. The blueprint had been all established, the process was established, and they're just really good at executing it. And the challenge in this context is there is no blueprint, there is no process. It needs to be developed. So the person that you hire has to be able to perform in that kind of unstructured environment. So the final comment I'll make there on what you should be looking for is at this phase of the company, you might have a handful of customers. You obviously have an MVP product. Your product managers have probably been talking to customers quite a bit. But when you hire this first salesperson, you are going to quadruple the interaction between your company and your market, right? There's going to be lots and lots of conversations every day between your company through the salesperson and your target audience. And the most important outcome from those conversations is actually not the revenue and customers that come from it, but the feedback and understanding of your target market. You know, you're
Yes.
really going to grow, and you might think you're at product market fit, but you probably aren't. And someone who's going to be able to not just go out and pitch your product and say it's not working, but instead someone who can go out and ask great questions of the target audience to understand how they think about the problem you're solving, how they prioritize it, and what other tangential issues are going on, to help bring that feedback back to your organization and help you fine-tune your message, fine-tune your product. That's going to be the most important outcome from these conversations. So I'd focus on someone that can excel in that environment. Usually they're a bit of an entrepreneur themselves. It'd be great if they had some sales experience, because that's going to be a component of it. But it's almost like a combination of a great product manager and a great salesperson in an entrepreneurial context. Right? Does that make sense, Diego?
Yeah. Sure. I was listening to a fireside chat last night, and you told exactly that this is a very hustle phase, right? So you don't need someone who was in a very big and structured organization when things are all messy, right?
Exactly. That they'll need to be able to perform in that.
Yeah, sure. It makes sense. Yeah, it happened to us. We thought we had product market fit like 4 times before we nailed the inside sales world. So we kind of been through that. Our CEO was selling that time, but yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Great.
So another thing I was listening to when on this fireside chat is that you said once, if a sales VP had 3 appointments, like 1, a sales meeting with his or her staff to motivate them, 2, a sales demo that could close his quota, and 3, an interview with a candidate for a sales rep, he or she should bring his A game and all his power to this interview. And so how do you think does this affect the organization at all?
Yeah, that's fictitious example that actually is true in many cases.
Yeah.
Is meant to represent that it's very easy to kind of not bring your full effort to hiring, because it's a little bit more of a long-term initiative compared to those other 2 examples where you're constantly chasing the quarterly or monthly quota in the world of sales.
Yeah.
If you think about it, it's not like you can totally bomb the big speech to the sales team, and it's not like you can totally bomb the lunch, but don't like half-ass the interview, and that's often the case. And here's why. Like, what is going to be the biggest impact on the company over the next year of those 3 meetings? Like, if you really crush that sales team meeting, your guys are going to be pumped for like the next day or 2. That's awesome, right? But like, it's going to go away, And if you actually crush that lunch and close that big customer, right? Like, as long as you have more than 5 customers, that's fine. I mean, it's going to be a kind of a blip on the system. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But if you make a bad hire in that interview, or if you miss out on recruiting your next top salesperson,
yes,
like that's going to have the biggest impact.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole bunch of data out there on how much the true cost of a bad hire is, and I've seen numbers that range from $500,000 to $4 million, and I don't doubt that. Right, so the whole point there is, when you're a sales leader, you tend to have a very short-term mindset, and hiring tends not to fall into that short-term mindset and gets, it's easy to half-ass. And just appreciate how important that is, and really work hard to bring your A game constantly to those efforts.
Well, yeah, it makes perfectly sense. We are always chasing the long-term and short-term chicken egg problem. So when you think of 450 employees, hiring makes a very big part of your routine and your efforts, right?
Exactly, and it should be the last thing that you let go of and delegate as you scale.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, obviously, as you start to scale, and get a dozen and 2 dozen people, you stop hiring individuals, and you stop spending selling. You spend a lot more time managing, and you hire a trainer, you hire a recruiter, you hire an ops person, and you continually delegate.
Yeah, okay.
You want to delegate last the hiring. Stay close to the hiring and involved in the hiring as long as possible, because it's such an important driver of success.
Wow, sure. So another thing I noticed is one of the key factors of HubSpot's success from the sales perspective is defining how the criteria for a salesperson should be, and consistently, as you said before, hire, train, and evaluate a salesperson, a sales rep against that criteria, right? So could you give us some thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. So this is also kind of an interesting area to explore, especially during this time that you're talking about, when you're migrating from the founder CEO doing most of the selling and having a dozen or so customers to really starting to scale a sales team and professionalize it.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, you want to have some sort of process. You'd be surprised how many startups are just like, yeah, we hired a good salesperson, just go find customers. And that's really the only guidance that they give them.
Yeah.
So you want to have a process so that you can fine tune it, you can measure it, you can develop pipeline, you can coach your salespeople, you can forecast. You don't want to be flying blind. You want to be able to understand what's going on and improve on it. And so the biggest mistake that companies make when they design it is they build the sales process based on the actions they want their seller to do. Right? So they'll say, okay, here's our sales process. Prospect, do some cold calls and emails, set an appointment, demo, and close.
Yes.
That's what we want you to do.
Yeah.
And that tells me everything the seller is to do, but it doesn't tell me what the buyer wants to be doing. And when you implement that, the salespeople are solving more for your direction and less for what the customer actually wants and needs, right? And
sure.
And lots of times, like, especially when you start getting down to a forecast or pipeline review to know where someone's is, who cares if the seller gave them a demo? That doesn't tell me anything.
Yeah.
I need to understand where the buyer is in their journey, right? So that's the biggest mistake. The thing you want to do is, when you're building your sales process, start with the buyer's perspective, start with the buyer's journey, right? So I like to talk about awareness, consideration, decision, right? So how do they become aware of the problem that you solve? How do they talk about that problem? And how do they decide whether or not to prioritize looking into it, right? And then what categories of solutions do they consider? And what specific vendors in those categories do they consider? And how are you uniquely differentiated as a category and as a vendor? And then when they move to the decision stage, how do they evaluate those different options? And who's involved? Is it the CFO, the CIO, the CEO, the marketing user? And what are their different unique perspectives when they look at the solution, right? So once you start, you really want to figure out what that buying journey looks like, and then build a sales process on top of that, and really define your sales process, not in seller actions, but in actions that your buyer's taking, right? So when I look at, like, and it gets right into implementing it into your CRM, right? When you think about the different stages of your opportunities, what I want those stages to be is, number one, I want them to be buyer actions, and number two, I want them to be inspectable, right? So an example for you is, instead of saying gave them a demo, right, did a demo as a stage, instead I might want to say discovery information validated. Okay, so what that means is, as a salesperson, I held a discovery call with the buyer, and I sent them an email saying, Diego, thank you for the time. This is what you told me about your current company and what you're looking to do. Please respond if this information is accurate or if there's anything you need to change. And then look for that customer to respond saying, no, this is spot on, I look forward to our next call, or change things. That's inspectable. And that tells me so much more about where that buyer is in their journey than just I gave them a demo. Does that make sense, Diego?
Yeah, sure. We talked about this on our blog. It makes a process, a sales process, very less effective if you look at from the seller perspective, because you give the customer a demo. You think the next step, the logical step, would to follow up and to close, but the customer doesn't even see the necessity or doesn't discover the problem. So he's way back there on the sales process, and you're thinking this prospect will close. So it creates a huge gap between the seller and the buyer on the sales process, right? So this gap makes everything ineffective.
You don't want to be looking at them through the lens of what your sellers have done, but instead what the buyers are doing and thinking. Exactly.
Wow. Yeah, sure. So, Mark, we were studying this theme, and we got into a research by Inside Square, showed that people is the most common reason that kept sales leaders up at night, and the most reason they worry about. So we've been reading a lot about sales enablement and how VPs are worried of providing the best tools, expertise, and intel so the reps can perform better and faster, right? So
exactly.
If I were a fresh VP of sales now, what would be your first advice to me on how to coach a sales rep?
Sure. So you asked about coaching, and you made some comments about sales enablement. When I looked at my sales enablement, especially the technology that I want to provide to my salespeople, what I want to do first and foremost is to solve for the customer, and that's really what I want to do with the technology. Is I want to find technology that gives my salespeople a better connection and a better understanding of the buyer, right? So lots of times that means, what have they been reading on my website? What have they been downloading? What emails have they been opening and reading? All this information helps me as a salesperson to understand what's important to the buyer and be more helpful to them. So that's my first thing. And my second thing is try to use technology to take all the administrative work out of the salesperson's responsibility. So don't put the onus on them to have to log calls, to log emails, to just try to bring all the technology to where they live, which is an email and on the phone and on the web, right? And just automate their action, the capturing of their actions and the capturing of that data, so you can be a better coach to them and better understand the process later on. The thing I would avoid with the technology is speeding up bad behavior, right? So an example of that unfortunately is kind of common out there, and as someone who's cold called a lot, it really hurts me, and it really tarnishes a brand in my opinion, in my view, from my perspective, and that is mass mail, right? So it really frustrates me when a salesperson just sends me the same generic email every time and the same generic voicemail. It just they don't care about me. They don't know who I am. I mean, I got cold calls yesterday inviting me to some CFO summit. I mean, that's so far off from what I even care about, and it tarnishes my perspective of that company, Yeah, and
sure.
You just got to be careful about the technology that you're empowering your salespeople with. Now, to get to your specific question on the coaching, it's one of those whole less is more situations where I've seen so many sales managers get promoted up. And then, clearly, especially if you have a promote from within culture, those sales managers really know their stuff in the funnel. And when they get a fresh salesperson who's just coming up to speed and ramping, oftentimes those managers can get a bit frustrated on how much of a gap, how many things there are to work on with this salesperson. And they end up trying to work on all of those things at once. And that can really overwhelm a salesperson. So the best thing to do is, understand all those things you need to work on, but try to find the one or two that are the most logical steps in their development and customize your coaching plan to them. And I like to use the metrics to do that diagnosis. So I like to see, like, I have an idea quantitatively what the ideal activity blueprint looks for a given week or given month. And then I can compare a salesperson's performance to that activity. And depending on where I see gaps, those gaps suggest to me where they're struggling most in their process, and I can customize a coaching plan to that. I call that metrics-driven sales coaching. So again, less is more when it comes to coaching.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks. So Mark, we've been hearing about sales pipeline management as one of the top concerns here in Brazil, especially from sales VP. I know you talked about our last questions on sales processes, but if you could point another one, big mistakes that companies make on sales pipeline management, like moving them forward, what would be?
Yeah, I mean, that was the biggest one that I commented on, was just base it on seller actions. Then you get happy ears and you get a misperception of where you actually are in your pipeline. I guess the other one I can comment on when it comes to, say, forecasting is don't feel like you have to restrict yourself to one approach to forecasting, right? So there's so many different approaches to forecasting. Some people like to just have reps do a commit and base it on the reps commit on accounts and revenue. Other people like to do a pipeline weighted average where when a deal hits this stage, it's 25%, 50% at this stage, etc. Other folks like to do, I want to have 4x pipeline in the pipe. Other people like to historically talk about like rep preferences. Like my favorite one is I like to see where a rep is forecasting a couple weeks before the quarter and then compare it to where they actually finish up and then do sort of a rep adjusted weighted average where like this rep always over forecast by 20% or this rep always under forecast by 20% and account for my forecast that way. So my point is you can do all of these. Don't feel like you have to be restricted to one way of forecasting your revenue. Do it in a couple different ways and then see how they compare. And, in months where they're all kind of telling you the same number, it's pretty comforting. And oftentimes that'll play out to be an accurate estimate. In other months, they could be, quite different. And that's concerning. You can kind of double click and look at it.
Yeah, sure. No, forecasting was another big mistake. So finally, our last topic. We're seeing here in Brazil and a global trend too, commissioning as a major issue for sales VPs. We see a trend that sales reps valuing autonomy and company purpose over money. So how do you see these factors compared to the financial upside? Are they really solid enough?
I think they are. I thought that was a really interesting question. I have not talked about this subject all that much, and I'm not surprised in your findings. I don't know the Brazilian culture very well, but I do think that there's a new generation of salespeople that I see globally that, based on their desires, I'm not surprised you're seeing these observations. I think it's a great thing. The reason why I think it's a great thing is sales, the word sales has always had a bit of a evil, negative connotation.
Yes.
Right? Like, no one's ever like, I've got a problem, let me go find a salesperson.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
But they should. They should.
Sure.
That's how we should be perceived we should be perceived as really smart, helpful folks. And, because the way the industry's evolved in the last few decades, the industry deserves the connotation it has. But this new mindset, especially being driven by the passion of the mission of the company, that's going to breed a new, generation of salespeople that gets us a little bit closer to that helpful, smart person that we would like to be perceived as. So I really like this. Now, it does challenge some of the traditional strategies that leaders have used to motivate folks. Like typically salespeople have been coin operated, and you could just tweak the comp plan to drive behaviors. So this is gonna, if what you're saying comes to fruition more aggressively, we're gonna have to rethink that approach. And I'll give you an example of what we've done here. We had a second dimension to our compensation plan, which was more of a promotion path. And what it did was it laid out a small set of goals. Maybe it was revenue under management, customer success of the customers you brought on, etc. And once you hit those goals, which usually took about a year to hit, but it didn't have to. It could be done in 8 months by an extraordinary performer, and some people it might take 15 to 18 months to achieve. Then you started to earn certain things, right? Like you started to earn the ability to work at home, and you started to earn a budget for your own self-development to go take college classes, right? Wow. So that's an idea that you can play with to really, align yourself with the new motivations of this next generation of salespeople.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, Mark, because you see millennials taking these jobs, right? And it's a very common characteristic of this generation to be not only money driven. So it makes total sense to us what's going on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sure. So would you like to leave a final message to our audience, our Brazilian VPs who are eager to hit their quotas and improve their teams?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I'd build off that last question, which is you folks are the new generation, and given everything that's happening, it's a special time for sales. Today's buyers are really empowered by the internet. They need salespeople less, but at the same time, they still need us, but they need us in a different way. And that is to really understand those buyers' issues and help them, whether that means with your solution or another solution. And so I'm really excited to see what you folks do with this industry and the perceptions, and I hope you push it toward a really respectable path.
Yeah, well, thanks for the message, Mark. So that's up for now. We thank you really for your time. It's been a great conversation. It's been a lecture instead. We're gonna hit play several times here on this podcast.
Great, Diego. I appreciate it.
So nice to talk to you, Mark. See you soon.
Okay, thanks, Diego. You too.
Bye.